Hello everyone. Today I have another very important guest who has a very good understanding about technology and future. And most importantly, our audience will be very impressed with his experience, his entrepreneurial experience, with his social contributions in Asia Pacific, even around the world. So, hello, Mr. David. How are you?
It's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me into this important discussion.
Thank you, sir. Sir, can you please introduce because you have I know that you have a very good future like a futuristic idea as well as you have a very good background. Can you share with our audience?
So I spent 25 years at the heart of what became the smartphone industry. At first, we were creating other types of devices. I can show this to the camera. This is a Scion organizer, a handheld computer from 1999. It still sort of works. There you can see my alarm clock on it, showing the time here in the UK. So I was involved in that as a software engineer first, then as a director of large software teams. And eventually we realized that people in the future wouldn't use this kind of device. Instead, they would use something we came to call smartphones. So in 1998, some of us spun out of that earlier company, Scion, based in the UK. We spun out a new company called Symbian with the mission to create the software platform to allow smartphones to be successful. And at that time, we also looked ahead towards the end of the first decade, 10 years' time. And we imagined that by about 2010, people all around the world would no longer be using normal phones, they would be using smartphones. And I have to say, most people laughed at us. Most people thought it's very unlikely that ordinary people, so-called, would want to use smartphones. At that stage, less than 1/6 of the world's population even had mobile phones. But it was our view that the technology would improve. It was our view that the usability would increase, cost would come down, applications would become more significant. Applications such as messaging and web browsing and navigations, later on applications to help with education, help with health, and of course, games, entertainment. And for a while, it was very disappointing. For a while, nothing much happened. For a while, the people who wanted to buy mobile phones kept buying dumb mobile phones. But over a while, that slow starting session of slow growth tipped over into a faster, more exponential growth. And eventually, after 7 years, my company was profitable, then very profitable. And in due course, people using the Symbian operating system inside phones from companies such as Nokia, Samsung, Fujitsu, Sharp, Motorola, Ericsson, Sony, and others. Altogether, there were about 500 million such phones shipped. So that was my business background. And over these 25 years, I realized more and more I was spending less time as a software engineer or even a software architect, and more time as what I came to call a futurist, somebody who is trying to imagine how products would change in the future, how user expectations would change in the future, how businesses would change in the future. So by 2009, that's already 11 years ago, I changed my business card to put on the words futurist and catalyst to help people think through the implications of the disruptive changes in technology ahead, to help them realize the changes in human lives that would arise, not just from smartphones. Increasingly, I wanted to talk about other technologies, what's been pioneered by the improvements in semiconductors and in wireless networks is going to be followed by improvements in artificial intelligence, nanotech, biotech, robotics, and numerous other fields. And so since 2009, I've been talking increasingly to people about the broader implications of technology. I still have a bit of income from consulting. Occasionally, I'm engaged by businesses, by government agencies, including in Malaysia from time to time, also in the Far East and in America and throughout Europe, to help them think through future scenarios. But mostly, I'm not doing this to earn money anymore. I'm doing it because I'm increasingly convinced that power of technology is so huge that it's going to change humanity's trajectory. It's either going to take us into a very bad place, a new kind of hell on earth, or it could take us into a very good place, a kind of paradise on earth. we're not likely to continue along the present business as usual trajectory. The changes enabled by the fourth industrial revolution technologies are so large. So that's what I prefer to talk to people about, how we humans can steer the future towards the sustainable superabundance rather than a new dark age.
So very interesting, very interesting. Even in my personal life, I'm actually from Dhaka, Bangladesh. I saw that how mobile phone technology has impact in our life, and 10 years of time, actually everything changed with the collaborations of mobile phone, with the collaborations of, let's say, Grameen phones, this Bikash and everything. Actually now everything is mobile centric, and most importantly you have an entrepreneurial contributions on that area. So when you build up technology, I just want to know for our audience, because we have many young entrepreneurs with us, when you build up this kind of software for this mobile phone technology and other things, how you develop your plan and how you think that it will be really game changer for civilizations.
So there's lots to say here. There are many skills involved in building a complex software project. It's not something you can easily write down in just a few bullet points, but let me pick out a few key points. If you don't focus on quality, you run into trouble sooner or later. If you think you can add in quality later on, you are misleading yourself. When you write software, you have to have quality in mind, not just quality for the actual application, but quality for the underlying platform as well. And what I mean by platforms is worth explaining. When you have an operating system, it will enable many different applications to sit on top of it. We designed the Symbian OS. We had some ideas which applications people would be using. We wrote some of the applications ourselves, but we knew there would be many other applications created by a large ecosystem of innovators, which we didn't anticipate in any details. Therefore, we needed a platform that provided functionality, sometimes called programming interfaces, application programming interfaces, also known as APIs. We needed to provide a development kit and test tools. And if you don't focus on the quality of that platform, you can be successful in the short term, but then when change comes along, when there are new applications with new requirements, you will find that your software is too brittle, too fragile. A word sometimes used is spaghetti. So if you are designing something you want to have a long-lasting impact, you have to be sure you get the insides right as well as the outsides. You have to focus on these broader quality issues. And if you rush to market too quickly, you may get some initial exposure and some initial positive feedback, but then you lead yourselves into more trouble. So what we did, both in the original company, Scion, when we created the software for personal handheld computers, and later in Symbian, when we created more software for smartphones, we put a lot of focus on long-term platform evolution, and we did not regret that at all. And that's an important criteria. Alongside quality, there are particular aspects of quality such as security, data privacy, and if you don't focus on that, again, you will regret it. There's also the importance of performance. Sometimes people say, well, we can fix performance by getting more expensive hardware. There was something called Moore's Law, which is still relevant today, which basically says every 18 months, the power of the semiconductors would double for roughly the same costs. So you'd have more memory, you'd have chips running at a faster rate. So there was a lazy kind of approach to performance issues. If your software was running too slow, you might shrug your shoulders and say, well, in 18 months' time, we'll have a faster hardware in here. But that's a false view, in my opinion. Instead, you have to focus on getting the software algorithms right as well. And if you spend your time focusing on the right algorithms, you can actually improve the performance of your software faster than just relying on these hardware improvements. So I'll focus on quality, focus on security and performance. There's a lot to keep in mind. It's hard to do it all by yourself, which brings me to the last important point I'll make here, which is the importance of working in teams, because no one person can be an expert in all these fields. It's hard even for the true superstar developers to be good in all areas. So it's important to be able to work in an open way with a number of other talented developers, sharing your code, getting feedback on your code in an open way without being defensive about it, without being upset when somebody criticizes. So having that attitude towards learning from group is also key to building something of lasting quality. So the talent of collaboration, talent of teamwork, I would also rate very highly if you want to have long-lasting impact.
Very interesting, sir. So beside that, like you can think about futures. You have a philosophical aspect, and you can understand the futures. My specific question is that at present situation, we are struggling a lot, economic wise, healthcare system wise, whole economy shutdowns. What will happen next 3 to 5 years? What will be the future of globalization?
So nobody actually has a crystal ball that they can reliably look into and tell you this is what's going to happen in 2 years' time, this is what's going to happen in 2 years and 6 months' time. Anybody who claims to speak with such an authority is a charlatan. It's a fake forecast rather than a true forecast. I can't tell you with any certainty what will happen, but what I can help people is to prepare for possibilities. And we needed to be aware of a whole set of different outcomes so that when the winds start blowing in particular directions, we at least are ready. Nobody could have predicted with any true confidence exactly when an outbreak of an infectious pandemic like COVID would take place. But people knew it would happen sooner or later, and therefore governments and other groups in society should have made better preparations to be ready to act quickly. A few countries did act quickly and are to be admired, but many other countries had actually reduced their resilience and their capacity for rapid response and have paid the price for that. The world as a whole did not invest sufficiently in the WHO, the World Health Organization. It cut back funding. It found reasons to criticize what that organization was doing. And it's always possible, if you look, it's always possible to find reasons to criticize what an organization is doing. If they had received more funding and more high-level support, they would have been better prepared to help us going down this particular route. But there are more changes coming ahead than in the past. That's my view. So the need for better foresight is stronger than ever before. I can point to a number of reasons. If we have time, I can highlight 4 different reasons why the world is likely to change more in the next 15 years than in any previous 15 years. In fact, why it's more likely to change more in the next 5 years than in any previous 5-year period in history. The first is we are much more connected. You and I have both traveled around the world a lot, much more than our grandparents could ever have imagined of doing. We are connected in so many ways, not just physically by aeroplanes and via the transmission of postal net, but also electronically. And as a result of our greater, deeper, faster connectivity, we are more vulnerable to all sorts of contagions and infections, not just the biological infections, although I do think there will be more pandemics coming than in the past. We're also vulnerable to financial contagion when a problem in one part of the economy or in one part of the world's financial system has consequences elsewhere. We're vulnerable to infections in our IT infrastructure when problems can cascade around and the infrastructure that we rely on, which we take for granted most of the time, will catastrophically fail. And very importantly, we're vulnerable to contagions of fake news, conspiracy theories, plausible sounding stories which actually are deeply harmful. And these are spreading around the world more than ever before. So reason number 1, more communications, more vulnerability to bad contagions, also vulnerable to good contagions. Sometimes things go viral in a good sense too. Secondly, it's not just that we're more connected. It is the technology which is being transmitted around the world is more powerful than ever. It's not just nuclear bombs. It's other kinds of explosives. It's artificial intelligence, which is incredibly powerful. biotechnology, which could change genetics and can target individual groups as a weapon with biological weapons. So we futurists talk about NBIC, nanotech, biotech, infotech, cognotech, rapid changes forming the fourth industrial revolution, which means there are bigger changes ahead. Third, we humans are increasingly out of balance with our environment. In some aspects, the relationship with the environment is getting better. It's not all doom and gloom. In some ways, we are using the environment more efficiently and less destructively than before, but there are too many other aspects of how we're using the environment, including global warming, runaway risks of dramatic changes in the climate and weather, the decline of biodiversity, the runoffs of nitrogen and other chemicals from our agricultural systems. There are all kinds of disruptions to the environment which could push us into more rapid change. And when you have people who have their livelihood disrupted by climate change, whether it's by storms or droughts or fires or famines, that builds up pressures in lots of other places. And finally, the fourth imbalance is within society. There is a greater inequality than ever before. The Gini coefficients are rising in many countries. And why is this? Several reasons, but part of it's due to technology, allowing the successful companies to be truly successful on a global scale. So the lion's share of profits and revenues go to a smaller number of companies run by a smaller number of people, and the second and third and fourth class get left behind. So we have increasing inequality, increasing awareness of inequality, and therefore increasing partisanship, fanned by fake news stories, fanned by rather bad conspiracy theories. People are blaming each other more than before, and is causing us to lose our rationality. So this partisanship, this tribalism, means we're more likely to have conflict of different types than before. So these are four reasons which increase the importance of us all thinking more seriously, more systematically, more objectively about the future.
Sir, your strategy and thinking process is very interesting. But from this point of view, let's say global warming. It's a major challenges for developing nations. What's the solution we have? Do we have a real solution in our hand? Can we negotiate with the developed nations? And can we save big human resources? How do you think? What will be the solution for developing nation?
Well, some developing nations have already leapfrogged over some of the other nations with longer established developed status. It's as with mobile phones, as with mobile money, some parts of Africa and Asia didn't have so much focus on wired connections, but went straight to wireless connections. And they were able to use eCash and other mobile money more quickly than in the established developed world, because in the established developed world, banks were in the middle and they didn't want to be displaced in the same way. So sometimes there is a possibilities for new countries to be more nimble. And there are countries throughout Africa which are doing very encouraging things. I mean, recently, the politics in Ethiopia has gone a bit more troubled, but it's still encouraging to see what has happened in that country. There are people in Addis Ababa who are remarkably good software engineers and practitioners of artificial intelligence. So many countries are able to take advantage of their situation and contribute in part to improving their own destiny. But in the end, I think we're going to need a better system of global cooperation. Every country is going to realize that it's in their own interests that all countries feel at peace and secure. And no country can think of building a wall around itself and saying, I'm all right, I don't care what happens elsewhere. That's a very short-term point of view. If other countries are left behind, it breeds negativity, it breeds resentment, it breeds fundamentalism of one sort or another, whether it's religious fundamentalism or political fundamentalism or other kinds of nasty dangerous suicidal tendencies, which could disrupt the well-being of the whole world. Bearing in mind, there's something called Moore's Law of mad scientists. Earlier, I referred to the original Moore's Law, named after Gordon Moore, the co-founder of Intel, that every 18 months, the power of semiconductors doubles for the same cost. Equivalently stated that you can have twice as many transistors in the same space. Well, Moore's law of mad science is not a real law, but it's a sort of a semi-serious remark that every 18 months, the IQ necessary for somebody to destroy the world decreases by a few IQ points. By that is meant that somebody who is angry and upset about the world, who is suicidal, who is for whatever reason angry at what has happened in his or her life, it is easier for them to get a hold of different kinds of weapons of mass destruction, whether it's cyber hacking, whether it's chemical weapons, biological weapons, or nuclear weapons. And if the rest of the world thinks it can ignore what's happening in these left behind places, that's a very short-sighted and foolish approach. That's a practical reason for wanting the whole world to come together. I also think there are many good psychic reasons. A country that manages to think itself safe and secure whilst ignoring the plight of those left behind is a country that's actually going to be deeply unhappy. They may have smiles on their faces, but actually it's bad for the soul. So for good psychic reasons as well, it's important that the whole world shares the remarkable fruits of abundance that the fourth industrial revolution is now placing in our hands.
Yes. So one specific things, as you are working with the youth, you are working with different university, you are working with as a government consultant. So skill is very important thing right now, skills for youth. So even when we work for a different kind of country from Asia, we find that still there is a huge underprivileged people, and those who are not still integrated with this kind of technology and these things. So what will be the future of these peoples? How you want to advise them, or how we can bring them in the main extreme of the benefit? What's the policy you can think?
So the most important skill for people to learn is to learn how to learn. The most important skill is to be able to use whatever resources are at hand, and there are many remarkable resources online. There are many free courses which can be accessed, and all people can have some way of getting some benefit from this so that we can step forwards rather than being stuck with what we happen to learn in a younger stage in our life. So we all need, in fact, to be able to recreate ourselves, because the pace of change is such that if we learn something at one stage and thought it's going to be enough for our whole life, it's actually probably going to be overtaken in maybe just 18 months or 2 years, and we will no longer be able to benefit from that original knowledge. So we need to be able to learn quickly by using online resources and by connecting into communities where we can help and teach each other. Related to that is the skill of agile. Agile came from the world of software. It means breaking down a big task into small sprints and being able to learn quickly from feedback from what you have achieved in a small sprint. Agile is particularly important in an environment of uncertainty, and we are increasingly in an uncertain world. Old styles of doing things, you can call them a waterfall, or you build a kind of machine. You decide at the beginning of the project exactly what you're going to do, and then you are focused on achieving it. It sometimes used to be called Six Sigma. There's no variation at all. That makes sense when things are well known in advance, when there's little probability of the customers changing their mind or the marketplace evolving. But in our world today, there is no such stability or certainty. So it's much more important to do a little bit quickly and then adapt to that, and to be able to learn from, as I said, feedback from what you have produced. So the broader skill of agility, coupled with this skill of learning how to learn, is important. And we're not going to be able to learn from these experiments unless there's one more skill that we have, and it's sometimes called a soft skill, but it's incredibly important. It's the skill of emotional resilience. It's the skill of emotional competence. It's the skill of not being upset when our project seems to fail, not thinking ourselves an idiot, but saying, well, now I have learned more. I am smarter. It's not trying to hide it away and denying you were involved in something that went wrong. It's building on the results of that failure. It's also not criticizing our team members unfairly when they fall into problems with their projects. After all, there were uncertainties which they probably couldn't have foreseen. Instead, we must have the emotional resilience to encourage our whole team to fail smart, fail forwards, and fail fast. And these may sound like buzzwords, but actually they are very important words. And it depends, as I've said, upon our own internal emotional confidence. And unless we have that internal emotional confidence, we're not going to thrive very well in the uncertain world of the next 5 years.
Yes, sir. Besides that, I just want to know, because I am also finishing my PhD on gender issue and gender inequality, and you are discussing on Gini coefficients, and you said that next few years there is a possibility that more equality will happen and it will create a problem for the society. Can you
More
give a
inequality, yeah,
Yes,
more
yes, yes.
inequality.
So how, can you give a deeper analysis on that particular point? Specifically, what will happen in Asia, Africa, and different countries, especially in gender inequality and these things?
Well, some countries are fighting back against the simpler forms of gender inequality. Thankfully, more parts of the many countries are alert to the fact that women are often underpaid for various reasons. After all, when women take a break from their career in order to have children, they return to the workplace later having missed out some progress. And so there are reasons why women are sometimes paid less, and there has to be counteracting forces to ensure a fair pay for fair work being done, and to value the diversity that can be brought by people with different genders. And of course, as you know, nowadays there are people who identify with a whole range of different genders, each of whom can bring a different diverse experience. But there are still forces driving us towards greater inequality. Basically, the force is the more you have, the better placed you are to earn even more. Whereas if you fall behind, if you're not careful, you will fall behind even more because your health will be poorer, you will be more afraid, your mental horizons will shrink down, and you'll be less willing to take risks. So we have to be aware of these magnifying cycles. One of the reasons for this magnification is that if you invest money, you often have greater growth in that money. If it's in the stock exchange or in property, you earn more from that than if you just have a career and your income is coming from your career. People who have money typically have an increase in their money faster than somebody who is just earning. That's because of the famous equation from the French economist Thomas Piketty, who described this phenomenon. But alongside that inequality, there's also the fact that, as I mentioned previously, the companies that are successful with new technology are able to do a great deal more with fewer people than in the past. If you go back 20 or 30 years, some of the largest companies in America were the motor car companies, Chrysler, Ford, and so on in Detroit. They have roughly, 20 or 30 years ago, had roughly the same revenues as the three largest Silicon Valley companies have today. But they had many more employees, roughly 10 times as many employees, because they needed more muscle power, more brain power. Whereas the Silicon Valley companies that have such large revenues, they get by with many fewer people. So there is this winner takes all scenario, explored in length by a couple of MIT economists who I would recommend, Eric Brynjolfsson and Andrew McAfee, who've written books such as The Second Machine Age, or another book called Machine Platform Crowd. I may have got that wrong. It might be Platform Machine Crowd or something like that. But anyway, in both of these books, they have analyzed this force. And how do we fix it? We need politics to fix it. We can't just rely on the market sorting itself out. It's been well known by economists for well over a century that there are tendencies in the free market towards greater monopolies, towards the rich getting richer. And in order for the market to remain competitive and effective, from time to time, the government needs to step in and break up monopolies to ensure that there is fair play. And so government does have a role to redistribute some of the fruits of the very successful technologies to everyone, rather than just relying on trickle down, which sometimes happens, but nothing like as much as some of the theorists would like to say.
Sir, beside that, as you are discussing on politics as well as different kind of technology, so when a government they develop their techno policy, so what type of things they should focus on in their techno policy for better future?
Well, here's an important example. The question is, what attitude should society have towards automation? Automation which can displace humans from the workforce. Many jobs that humans used to do are no longer needed because technology can do it instead. It's been a long process. When I was young and I went to big cities, lifts, elevators were operated by humans. And there are no longer humans doing these jobs because elevators are smart enough to operate themselves. And that's just one example. There used to be lots of people with secretarial jobs or typing jobs. Again, most of them have been displaced. The process is accelerating. Many millions of people around the world get income from driving trucks or driving lorries or vans or private cars. That is likely to be displaced soon by greater automation, self-driving cars. Should we as a society be worried about it? Should we fight against it? There is a lot of people saying, oh, this is terrible. People will no longer have jobs. They will no longer have income. They will no longer have a purpose in their life. That's a reactive vision. It's a vision that looks to ideals from the past. In the past, it did make sense that if you did not work, you were a second-class citizen and you shouldn't get so much income and you should be encouraged to work. But in the future, as there is more automation, producing the food, producing healthcare, producing education, we should celebrate that. And we need to change how society operates so that even if people don't work, they are still able to have a good quality of life. Already we say if somebody is old enough, they don't need to work, we give them a pension. When people are young enough, we say they don't need to work. We no longer send our children to work in factories, or in Victorian England, the boys used to go up chimneys to clean the chimneys. We no longer think that's a good idea. Instead, we like to give young children money from free education and so on. Well, we need to extend that. There's the idea of a universal basic income, which is part of the solution. Even more important is to reduce the costs of all the essentials of a good life, to make education increasingly free, to make healthcare increasingly free. How? By automation. We have to set the criteria of evaluating society. It should no longer be the GDP when we're looking to have larger profits and larger revenues. Instead, the criteria, politics needs to change to focus on, are all people in this country able to have a good quality of life, without focusing on are they working or not. Instead of trying to maximize the employment ratio, we should be maximizing the unemployment ratio. So this is looking to a future that is quite different from the past, and it leaves people uncomfortable because many of these old certainties are being removed. Well, I say we need to get used to this idea. In the future, few people will have to work for a living. In fact, nobody will have to work for a living. Some people may choose to work for a living. Instead, we will be tended, if we get this right, we will be tended by software, AI, and robots of various sorts that will be producing all these things for us, allowing us humans to focus on whatever we want to focus on, allowing us to pursue what we currently call our hobbies or our retirement fantasies. So we'll be able to explore music, explore drama, explore mathematics, explore human relationships, explore the solar system, explore the moons of Jupiter, do all kinds of things in terms of creativity and exploration. That is the future that I would point politicians towards, rather than trying to regain some false mythical state from the past, the 1950s or 1970s or 1990s or whatever different politicians may imagine was an ideal state. I say no. The better future is different from the past. The better future is not the same as the past. We need to think about it now and get used to it.
Yes, very interesting, sir. Sir, one specific thing as you are discussing about technology, globalization, future strategy, many more things. And what will be the future of USA and China relationship? Because already we see that there are some tension. So, what do you think?
Well, this is a very worrying development, frankly. It's natural these two great powers will have some tension. They have different views on how to organize society. In principle, one is in favor of the distribution of power, a free press, and allowing the citizens to vote the leaders out of power. The other, China, has much more of a idea of perpetuating the central power. These are two different approaches, so it's inevitable there will be some tension between them. But sadly, it's getting much worse in recent years, in recent months even. And it's a worrying development because we do not want to go into a new Cold War, as seems to be the case. We need to have the countries engaging in the same way that the first Cold War came to a sort of end for a while. If you go back to when Ronald Reagan, the American president from 1980 to 1988, he had a series of meetings with Mikhail Gorbachev. At first, these two were sworn enemies. When Ronald Reagan came to power, he used to speak about the Soviet Union as being the evil empire. When Mikhail Gorbachev came to power in the mid-1980s, he inherited, 60 plus years of the Soviet Union thinking of the West as evil capitalists. But the two leaders, despite their very different backgrounds, did manage to form some relationship. They managed to see that if they kept on going down their current trajectory, it would be very bad for the world. And they ended up with significant strategic arms reductions. They ended up with some elements of denuclearization. And for a while, at least, the world came into a safer place again. We need something similar to happen. And let me tell a little bit more of that story. Because one reason that the two leaders, Reagan and Gorbachev, came to be reconciled to an extent was because of the work of a futurist. His name was Carl Sagan, well known for the programs he did with Cosmos. But he was also one of the people who helped to publicize an understanding of nuclear winter. Nuclear winter was the idea that if several nuclear bombs went off in a limited nuclear exchange, as the strategists in both the USA and the USSR were contemplating, it wouldn't just lead to greater heat, it could lead the whole world into a new ice age because of the dust that was emitted from these explosions. It would go into the stratosphere and block the light from the sun. People hadn't appreciated that before. And as this horrific possibility became clearer due to the work of communicators, brilliant communicators, such as I mentioned, then it was a pause. The people in both sides of that previous divide stopped and thought. And thanks to Carl Sagan and others, they were more prepared to rethink their future. Well, if America and China keep going on their current trajectory, things will be bad. We need to highlight, not nuclear winter in this case, but a different bad scenario, which is what happens if people keep rushing in a race to build AI, artificial general intelligence, quickly. Because the risk of having more and more powerful artificial general intelligence, it's a bit like building nuclear weapons. You don't know in advance what will happen. And if you do it in a rush, without focusing on quality, as I spoke about before, if you skimp on quality because of being in a terrible rush, the world's likely to regret what it accomplishes with its greater artificial intelligence. Instead of being glad, we will be despondent. It's like the social networks we have built. When we were a few years younger, we used to look forward to Facebook and others connecting the whole world. What could go wrong if the whole world's connected, we thought. Then we realized, fake news can go wrong, and tribalism and filter bubbles can go wrong. We're pushing people into being angrier and more hateful than before. Well, with greater artificial intelligence, the possibilities are even larger that different people will be manipulated into hating each other and doing bad things to each other. Not because anybody consciously planned it, but because that's what the AI might end up doing. A bit like capitalism has some bad consequences if nobody thinks hard enough about it, it will be even worse when capitalism is tied to rapidly improving AI. So that scenario needs to be forefront in the minds of the leadership of both China and America. And in China, I do believe that the leaders understand this. Xi Jinping was photographed not too long ago with his bookcase behind him, and on his bookcase, the president of China had two books on AI and the future. One is by the University of Washington professor Pedro Domingos. It's called The Master Algorithm, How the Different Tribes of AI Will Combine in the Future. It's an interesting book on scenarios for the future. And there was another book by a New York futurist, Brett King, which it looked as if Xi Jinping had also been reading. Whereas if I contrast that with leadership in America, I don't see that same commitment to scientific objectivity, and it's a sad development. So we've got to hope that respect for science, respect for objectivity, respect for a deeper understanding re-emerges in the leadership of the US by one means or another, and then the discussions between the US and China can go in a more collaborative way rather than increasing hostility.
Very interesting. So, beside that, we know that Europe has very good contributions for development, educations, and many interesting things, even technology. So, how do you think about Europe role specifically? Even though we know that now UK is outside of European Union, but what will be the future role for on behalf of politics, technology, knowledge-based society?
So the future of Europe is up in the air as well. It's uncertain. There are many remarkably good things in different parts of Europe. I can point to the educational system in Finland, for example. It's arguably one of the best in the world in terms of results. There's a great deal that can be learned from how well the Finns regard and reward teachers, and the children are not forced to early rote learning too young, and they are given a great deal of freedom, and they grow up well balanced and able. We can point to many good things happening in countries such as Latvia and Estonia as well, where they have been pioneers in online government and such systems. So there are many encouraging things happening in Europe. And some countries, such as Germany, have made a reasonably good job of managing the COVID crisis. However, Europe is in a great deal of tension. Its common currency, the euro, had some flaws in its original design. It was imagined that the financial connectivity would in due course be balanced by a political connectivity that has not yet arisen, closer union. Therefore, the euro is still under pressure, and there are some futurists who think that very bad things will happen to the eurozone in the future. I'm not convinced myself. I think there is a lot of resilience in the eurozone countries, but it is a worrying thing. So Europe is going to need mature management as well. And if Europe is preoccupied by conflicts, sadly, as Britain has triggered by its Brexit, it's been quite confrontational. It has not been helpful. I'm not a fan of what the British government has done on this, to be clear. I personally would have much rather preferred a greater collaborative spirit. And if more divisiveness prevails in Europe, and there are other tensions such as Hungary and Poland, two countries with lots of fine tradition, lots of very bright people, but they are going less democratic by the minute, as it were, with clampdowns on free media. If this is not handled well, Europe might become less significant in the world in the times to come. So Europe is facing some hard problems. Thankfully, many European leaders are aware of that and are seeking to convert Europe from its present system into a more effective future set of relationships, which would involve probably some deeper relationship than is at present. And some countries might object to what they would see as a loss of sovereignty, but actually we will gain greater freedom if we give up some of our perceived local sovereignty. By giving up that local sovereignty, we will end up in a better overall state. It's a bit of a paradox, but it needs to be understood and accepted.
Sir, there are two audience response. Nasrul Islam, he's enjoying your session. Stila, he's actually say hi to you, and he said that he want to invite you in Archer report soon, and your work is always great. I think he's from Australia. So
it's a good show. Yes, people should look at the Archer report. He
yes,
has an interesting futurist point of view, and he's quite happy to challenge conventional thinking. Conventional thinking will not save us in our present situation. We need some more radical ideas, which still Archer has on his shows. So I recommend that to all listeners.
okay, sir. Thank you, sir. Sir, one specific things, like example, as you are a future thinker, then a lot more things actually happening. So this time, your prediction, your analysis is very much important, even for policymaker, for government, for corporations. By this way, we can improve or we can overcome from this situation. For a long time, actually, Middle East playing a very good roles, and every country has a good interest on Middle East, and Middle East also have a lot of challenges and other things. What will be the post-COVID situation in Middle East, business-wise, politics-wise, or globalization impact-wise? What will happen?
Well, there's a lot of uncertainty in many countries in the Middle East too, of course. Countries could work well together. Iran is a fascinating country. I'm connected to many futurists in Iran. They have a good awareness and appreciation of the importance of foresight. And I have some excellent conversations there. But whether that country is able to follow truly objective scientific principles or not is still an open question, or whether they might be misled by a return to what I spoke about before, which is political leaders who imagine that things were better in a past system than they could be in the future. And there is a very worrying tension between Iran and Israel. The two of them do regard each other as mortal enemies, and that's not at all helpful. So it's far better if that state of increased tension could be healed and calmed down. Of course, there are tensions elsewhere in the Middle East, which you know very well. India and Pakistan have tensions, India and China, although it's moving further away from the Middle East. We all need to be better at building constructive relationships, despite feeling nervous, despite potentially feeling alienated. We need to be able to do what some great leaders have done in the past. If we look at Nelson Mandela, we can look a bit at what happened between Sadat and Begin, the Egyptian and Israeli leader, at one stage, when they both were able to transcend their histories and sit down together, despite critics on all sides telling them they should not be meeting with the devil, so-called, but they managed to build at least some peace. So we need to encourage people with that kind of peaceful attitude. We can learn from the remarkable things that Nelson Mandela did in his long walk towards greater peace and stability in South Africa. And we need to highlight and support others throughout the Middle East to enable that to happen. If we don't manage it, then sadly, I do expect many things can get worse. And I don't offer a naive, optimistic prediction for any country for the future. Although we have the power with technology to build a superabundance, we also have the power to inflict terrible damage on each other by weapons, by manipulation of the media, by fake news, and by AI running amok on our behalf. So all countries around the world have to have the challenge of transcending their past instincts, learning that there's a better future ahead if we can learn to cooperate in an agile and techno-progressive way.
This is very interesting that you are talking about techno-progressive way, and most important part of that, it's my understanding, education playing a very important role, very important role. So even I'm from academia. I have some experience from the academic side, specifically in Asia and Europe and other countries. How you want to define the role of academia, and specifically now many things happening, online educations and offline educations, or you are also have your futuristic idea and many things. How academia can play a very good role for this techno progressive society.
So a better education is absolutely core to getting a better future. I spoke about NBIC, which is nanotech, biotech, infotech, and cognitech. They are hard sciences. And in each case, they have tremendous potential to change the world. Whether they change the world for good or for bad will depend upon another set of technologies, which I sometimes call social tech. It sort of sits at the heart of the picture. It's often neglected, but it covers technologies such as finance, ledgers, blockchain, and data management, privacy and security. But most of all, it covers the technologies of education and politics. And whereas nanotech is about manipulating atoms, biotech's about manipulating genes, infotech's about manipulating bits, cognitech's about manipulating the neurons in our brain, social tech is about understanding and manipulating values. It's teaching people to think hard about what's really important in life so that we don't just get dominated by short-term materialistic or consumerist pressures. There's nothing wrong with material goods. There's nothing wrong with being a consumer. But if we let them dominate our lives and drive out the other more important values, then we're likely to build a very bad world. So education must change a great deal. It must change first in terms of how it is delivered, its framework. It must take more advantage of online courses. It must take more advantage of collaborative teams, self-learning. But also the content needs to change. It must become more dynamic. The syllabus probably needs to update more regularly, and it needs to focus on some of the things I already mentioned, like learning how to learn, like the skills of agility, then the skills of foresight, the skills of imagining scenarios, the skills of evaluating scenarios, the skills of figuring out which scenarios are science fiction, Hollywood fantasies that actually we shouldn't pay attention to, and which other scenarios actually are more credible, technologically credible, sociologically credible. So let's develop more foresight skills, teaching people even from a very young age about that. But then there's also the resilience, emotional skills, teaching people to be self-aware, self-confident in the right way, teaching people to bounce back after failures, focusing on building collaborative relationships, being willing to copy. When teachers say, don't copy, work it out for yourself, that's not a very good lesson for life, because in life, we actually do copy and we will succeed. So there needs to be a change in how education is delivered, and also a change in the content of education. And too much of the academia is a little bit stuck in the past, is doing things which made good sense 10, 20, 30 years ago, but is less suitable in today's more dynamic, faster changing world. And it's the same in academia as in many other industries. People are afraid of losing their jobs due to automation. When they are aware that students can learn more from the best YouTube lectures than they can from their own teaching, many teachers regard that as a threat. And to an extent, it is a threat because they might lose their jobs. But society needs to reorganize itself so that teachers are paid better, not for trying to copy the best lectures. Instead, the teacher should be the guide on the side instead of the sage on the stage, to use a kind of a simple formula. Teachers must move from being the sage on the stage, the person delivering the materials, to somebody who acts more as a mentor, helping children of all ages, young and older, to adapt and to localize and personalize the insights for themselves. And we need to value teachers for doing that. And we need to ensure that there is still plenty of social respect for teachers. So academia has a very important role, but it will not succeed unless itself, it changes. And that will only be possible if government and society takes conscious steps to value the right kind of teachers more than ever before.
Yes, sir, thank you. Like we know you are also a writer, so even from audience they want to know more about your book. So can you please share some insight from your book with our audience?
Well, I've written or edited 9 books altogether. I did write one about my experiences in the smartphone industry. It's just an ebook, so I can't show you that one. But if people are interested in the ups and downs of Nokia, Ericsson, and Motorola, what they did right and what they did wrong over the 20 years from about 1988 to about 2010, about that period, that's covered in my book, Smartphones and Beyond. But then I wrote a book which, excuse me, let me see if I can show it to the camera. If I bring it
Yes,
over
yes.
here, The Abolition of Aging. It's how technology can use nanotech and so on to allow a forthcoming radical extension of healthy human longevity. It's about the possibilities that not only will the life expectancy increase a bit more, as it's done over the last 200 years. It's moved from an average expectancy of about 35 to an average expectancy of about 72. We could raise it much more by different approaches. And so aging may become a thing of the past. Of course, we'll become chronologically older, but we won't become biologically older. We'll be as fit and healthy at 95 as we are at 55, and later we'll be as fit and healthy at 125 as we were at 25. That's within our grasp. So that's something I wrote about, explaining the changes in genetics, the changes in rejuvenation biotechnology that made that happen. And of course, that raises a lot of questions about the implications. What will happen if people no longer grow old and die? How will that change society? How might that change the planet? Will it be bad news if the population grows? How can we avoid it? So lots and lots of questions, which I answer at some length in there. But as I wrote that book, towards the end, I gave more thoughts to, well, what could go wrong? How would this desirable future not be achieved? And most of the issues I came up with, they were to do with politics. They were to do with growing inequality. They were to do with the threat that some wealthy people might take this technology and keep it to themselves and not freely distribute it. So then I wrote this, Transcending Politics, a techno-progressive roadmap to a comprehensively better future, in which I look at the role of politics to address inequality. I look at the role of politics to help society decide which new technologies should be advanced, like next generation green technologies, for example, and which other technologies should be viewed very carefully. It's a great book, but people told me it's far too long. It's very thoughtful. It's like a professor's book. So then I tried to write a simpler version of that. It's easier for people to read and understand. So this is a much shorter book, Sustainable Superabundance, a universal transhumanist invitation, in which I set out some of the same ideas much simply, although there's still lots of hard material in there as well. And you can look at the subtitle, A Universal Transhumanist Invitation. The word transhumanist in there stands for transcending human nature, transcending some of the bad aspects that we have inherited from evolution, not only the nature that makes us grow old and weak and feeble, but also our instincts towards tribalism, our instincts towards abusing power, our instincts towards deceiving each other and deceiving ourselves, our cognitive biases that prevent us thinking clearly. All of these things can, I believe, be transcended by good use of technology in the coming years. And then people say, well, this is still very interesting, but how do you go about it step by step? So this is the last book I'll show for now. It's Raft 2035, the most recent book, in which I set out how we can change between now and 2035 to get abundance, flourishing, and transcendence. I set out 15 goals in here, and each of the 15 goals for 2035, I also spell out 2 goals to achieve by 2025. That's in the next 5 years. And this follows my same principles of agility. How do you get something big accomplished? You have to break it down into smaller steps. Well, from now to 2025, of course, is quite a big step, but it's a smaller stepping stones along the way. And so it's targets that I highlight to people who are interested, not just in making a career, but who share with me the vision to ensure we end up in a much better world rather than a much worse world.
Yes, sir. This is really nice discussions. Even from our audience, Suhail Rana, he says really it's a great discussion. Thanks, Mr. David, for sharing your visionary ideas. So yes, this is really visionary idea, and you come up with a very interesting book, many interesting idea. I hope that different university from Asia Pacific, they will use your book for their research, for their students, even different library and many things. They definitely will collect your book. And most important thing is that how you share your future point of view. This is the most important thing. I believe that the politicians, corporations, even like NGOs and the universities, everybody need to understand the futures. When they understand the futures, then we can contribute more for the modern world. My last questions for you, sir. Can you give us some advice for this society that how we should take next step and next responsibility, and how should we play together?
You mean your World Technology Economic Forum network,
Yes,
sorry?
yes,
Did I get that
yes.
right? World
World Talent
Technology,
Economy, World Talent Economy Forum.
World Talent. I'm sorry, I got the wrong T. Yes. So it's exactly the right things to look at, looking at on a worldwide level, because these things are truly global. And talent is key, which means individuals growing and flourishing and being able to develop themselves and contribute more. So how can your organization grow? Well, I don't want to be glib here because I'm not very familiar with the details of your organization. What you're doing is great, bringing in many people from around the world into conversations. At some stage, you may bring several people into the same conversation, because sometimes the best insight arises from different people who actually will challenge and build on each other's remarks. Now, you are doing a great job with me, adding value, but sometimes if there's even more people in the conversation, it could be that we will challenge each other, and people will point out. They may say to me, David, you've said this, but what about this? In a way that it's will truly enlighten the audience. So that is a good thing to do as well. And in due course, you have to maybe capture some of the learnings and publish them separately, because an hour-long video can be fascinating for people who've got the ability to watch it. But I know from my own events, London Futurists, which typically last 90 minutes or 2 hours, what I'd really like is to find ways to capture a few key highlights from there in short 7-minute little sections, or even 2-minute little sections. And if we can do that, we can reach out to even bigger audiences who wouldn't be prepared to listen to us for a whole hour, but might indeed listen for 2 minutes, and that may move them from being slightly interested to being much more interested. So that's a couple of suggestions.
Yes, thank you, sir. Even World Talent Economy Forum, if you join as an advisor for us, so definitely we can follow all of your guideline. And from next month, we are trying to develop some policy discussion, group discussion. Definitely, we're gonna invite you with different cultural people, different kind of peoples. Then hopefully it will be more effective. And most importantly, yes, with our IT team, we are working how we can make it more efficient and more effective. First thing first, we are trying to developing a community, those who have learning attitude. So hopefully, first we build up the learning community, knowledge-based community. Then we move with some small part of the videos and the key points, and by this way we will integrate it with our community. And yes, we have many students. We are collaborating with them. Many university, governments, and policymakers, they are with us, and definitely as much as possible, we will collaborate with around the world. And need more of your support, need more of the intellectual people support, more people we need, because the more different culture, different views, different opinion we will bring, then we can enlighten our society, we can develop our society, we can create a real knowledgeable society. So this is our objective. World Talent Economic Forum always believe on knowledgeable people, always believe on a knowledgeable society. Perhaps this is the ultimately solution for the world. Thank you, sir, for your valuable times and for your very interesting idea and discussion.
You're welcome. It's been a fabulous time.
Yes, thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.